you please not talk? I'm going live. For the last 4 weeks, previously on Bat March, the last time this happened, we were down a man, and we were forced to watch the worst Batman movie in all of history. It killed the franchise for 8 years, and essentially, it killed all superhero movies in general. That is, until the 2000s came around. I'm the Silver Screen Slasher, and welcome back to Bat March. And joining me this evening are my good friends, the Film Reject, and Spike, a Greene, of the Film Geek Collective.
Yeah, George A.K. Spike Greene, you know it. All right, and the movie we're doing today is Batman Begins, directed by Christopher Nolan, story by David S. Goyer, co-written by David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan. Surprising because, you know, he tends to write with his brother Jonathan a lot. You know, Chris Nolan tends to do that a lot.
And I'm the Film Reject, and I reject films that aren't worth mentioning.
As Mr. Greene has mentioned, today we're looking at Batman Begins, released in 2005 and directed by Christopher Nolan. And if it isn't obvious by the music, by the opening theme, then yeah, we're getting into the Christopher Nolan films by this point. Which
Not only that.
The Nolan trilogy is said to be some of director Christopher Nolan's best work, as well as some of his other films he made.
I think Inception's his best, honestly.
Honestly, mine's The Dark Knight.
And Christopher Nolan. Well, he. I was actually thinking I might say this in the last few minutes of this review, but I actually wanted just to say it now as well for the opening.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Nolan introduced Batman into the world like in pretty much in a new shape, if you know, like he reintroduced the character in a way and made him popular again by pushing the envelope of like some other comic book films by making them more darker, more grittier, and more realistic than ever.
Yeah.
And I feel like he honestly, for his first film of Batman, he honestly did it pretty dang well, honestly.
Before we actually get into the review, a little bit of background. The last time, as I mentioned previously, the last time a Batman movie came out was Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997, and this gave Mr. Schumacher an accomplishment that no villain in Batman's rogues gallery has ever managed to do. Joel Schumacher killed the Batman.
And it's actually something that I sort of said before in the Batman Robin review as well. If you guys do see it, you probably know what I mean. But yeah, as I said before, he pretty much, I'm sorry to say, Joe Schumacher, but you pretty much killed the franchise.
Yeah, both this film and Steel, starring Shaquille O'Neal, which came out the same year, were said to be the movies that almost killed the comic book movie as a whole. That is until 1 year later when Wesley Snipes came out with Blade, made in 1998, and it completely revived the comic book movie as a whole. Then we had similar films to it, like X-Men, Spider-Man, Daredevil, and eventually, Batman Begins.
Now, may I point something out about the previous films? Like, you know, they were almost a film like X-Men was almost ashamed for the superhero thing. Like, you know, at one point Wolverine makes fun of the yellow spandex, but then Spider-Man appeals more to the comical nature. This is sort of that in between Batman Begins. At least it has, as much as I love Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man movie, at least Batman Begins doesn't make their villain look like a Power Rangers costume. I'm sorry to say.
Hey, don't worry, totally understood. So let's dive into the world of Christopher Nolan, take a look at Batman Begins, and see what happens when you become more than just a man. You become a legend.
Oh, by the way, Silver, do you want to actually explain maybe a bit of the... Actually, now thinking about it, now I might actually take a bit of the plot myself. I might explain a bit of it, because I do know a bit of it.
Yep, so from here on in...
The plot's all yours.
From here on in, spoiler alert.
Spoilers!
Yep, spoilers if you have not seen Batman Begins.
Rat spoilers!
Here we go. So this film pretty much starts off with Bruce Wayne playing a young Bruce playing with his childhood friend Rachel. Oh, and but one day he suffers, I guess, a bit of a accident or a fall,
He
but
falls down a well.
not just any well, a bit of a dark sort of well, so to say. And well, out of nowhere, he looks and he hears something, but out of nowhere, a whole bunch of bats start bursting out and flying all over around him and into his face and everything. And
And then we
well,
cut to him
as
as
we find out, and as you can see, we find out how he got the idea of the Batman.
not yet though.
Yeah,
It's at
and of
this point
course,
we did.
bats are his greatest fear.
It's at this point though we actually cut to somewhere to the other side of the world, where we now meet an adult Bruce Wayne, played by Christian Bale, who's honestly my second favorite live action Batman, and just below Michael Keaton.
Mm-hmm. So, oh right. So yeah. Okay. I was being really careful not to interrupt anyone because yeah, I've been working on that lately, even in the podcast. But yeah. Anyway, so I really okay. What was it? So the Batman. Okay,
Yeah,
my
Christian
favorite's
Bale.
probably my favorite probably is gonna still be Michael Keaton. But then I watched a few episodes of the animated series, and Kevin Conroy's really good. But then Christian Bale, you know, he has that really growly voice that is maybe a bit overly growly. Maybe they could have dialed that back a little, but it's more of a problem in the second movie, you know. And by the way, I will be looking at my notes for this show occasionally, just like the film reject is.
Totally understandable.
Oh, anyway, as I was saying before, also what I like about this film is, unlike Man of Steel, where I'm just saying every few seconds or whatever, it cuts back to his childhood, his teenage years, and his grown-up years. But this film at times does take a break from all that and just does switches to his either to his adulthood or his childhood at the right moment, in my opinion. And it gives us a bit of time to at least see a bit of his childhood and his adulthood. But anyway, later on, Thomas Wayne comes back down and he gets poor Bruce out of the well, and I guess takes him to nurse him for a while. Then unfortunately, though, later on that night, at a theater, Bruce and his parents are watching an opera or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and this isn't just any other normal opera. These opera performers or singers are dressed up as his greatest fear, bats.
Well, that reminds me.
This performance unfortunately scares poor little Bruce, and so they go outside, and so he begs his father if they can go home, and so they do, or do they? And that means yes, as you probably all know from the comic books, it becomes that one tragic night that poor Bruce suffers.
It's indeed. It's at this point that the Wayne family bumps into Joe Chill, the man who killed Bruce's parents, and just like I had said, he shoots down Thomas and Martha Wayne in cold blood. Something that's normally done in only a minor flashback in the other movies.
I was gonna say because I honestly, it's been so long since I've seen this trilogy that I don't know if they
Me
even
too.
kill the parents' killer later. Do they? I forget.
Yeah. Uh, well, his face is shown. It's not, and it turns out it's not. It's not Jack Napier. It's just Joe Chill,
Mm.
like how it originally was in the comics.
Yes.
And as a kid, after his parents are dead, at this point we meet the future Commissioner Gordon, and played by Gary Oldman, who actually does a pretty good job replacing Pat Hingle in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, honestly, I think I always liked this his version of Commissioner Gordon or Jim Gordon at this point because he doesn't come commissioner yet. But
Yeah.
and do you know what I like about this film, or at least in this trilogy?
Mm-hmm.
He's just so Gary Oldman is just so nice. So even young Bruce, he takes care of him for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he and yeah, but meanwhile, as he's, I don't know, kind of looking after him in the police station for a while, whole bunch of, well, damn photographers are trying to get their best shots of young Bruce, um, and then
That's just wrong.
Commissioner Loeb breaks the news to young Bruce that the man who killed his parents, they got him.
Oh.
They
Yeah.
brought him to justice.
I was going to say there was one thing in common with another Nolan thing. That's there was a film he made a year later, The Prestige, that also deals with theatricality and deception, because they say theatricality. They say in Batman Begins, theatricality and deception are your greatest weapons. And so I feel like Nolan's really, he really likes that theme of illusion in these two films. I'm not going to say anything about The Prestige. I did do a review of The Prestige for a Real Sharks Victorian special episode podcast. So if you want to go look for that, that's all good. It was a short review, and it was back earlier. It was like last year or something, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I just thought I'd lead you to that and lead you to another Nolan link. And, I just think that he's been very interested in theatricality in both those movies. So I thought I'd provide that little link there.
Speaking of theatricality being the greatest weapon, outside of the flashbacks, and after Bruce gets into a fight with some of his fellow inmates, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, adult Bruce is currently locked up in a prison halfway around the world. And eventually, after he gets locked up in solitary confinement, it's then we meet a temporary ally / future villain, and who I'm going to refer to now as Henry Ducard, played by the great Liam Neeson. And honestly, this is by far one of my favorite characters in the entire movie. I'm not going to spoil. I'm not going to mention his real name right now. I'm just going to keep referring to him as Ducard. But honestly, he does a really good job building him up as a sort of mentor for Bruce. It's only revealing his true identity before the third act.
Yep, but in case you don't mind, I want to go back to, anyway, actually a bit of the plot and also get to, first off, Bruce Wayne. Don't get me wrong, we'll talk about Liam Neeson's character in a short bit. I actually just want to talk about Bruce Wayne and Batman as a whole. Because honestly, I feel like there's a few important things that I want to mention about this version of Batman.
Like Alfred?
Yep, well, actually, do you know what I like about him in this film? You can tell, yes, he is the Batman. He has a whole bunch of, great gadgets and everything. But you can tell that underneath that mask, he is just a man who is afraid of something, but not only that, is trying to overcome his challenges and is trying to, and you can tell even back, of course, in this first film, he's only been Batman for a short while, at least in the first few minutes. So he's still kind of learning even the responsibilities of being the Batman, and this is his first time. He's not used to this, so he has to get used to this as well. Like he has to try and, of course, you can tell this is a guy with as well a few issues, especially in the first few minutes before he becomes the Batman. He is not invincible, and he does have a few challenges, and he does have a bit of an issue.
That is true. I feel like we should also give a bit of a shout out to some of the secondary characters, like the aforementioned Rachel Dawes, as his childhood friend, now played as an adult by Katie Holmes, who would later be replaced in The Dark Knight for reasons I don't entirely remember.
But Rachel's definitely a better actress in my opinion. Katie Holmes was a little bit.
Rachel!
I didn't really like some of her delivery in this movie, just constructively. I'm not nothing against her, obviously. I just maybe the way she says, "Yeah, you better run." It's just sort of off, sort of like I don't know if I was imitating it correctly, but I feel like she was serviceable, I guess. But I'm glad they replaced it with Maggie.
Yeah. And as for who we were talking about, Reject, we were talking about Rachel.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I just found her a little bit bland in this film. No offense, of course, to the actress, as Spike said. I thought she was okay. To me, she's just kind of a usual damsel in distress. Although at times she can be kind of strong. Like, after all, those thugs who tried to kill her before on the subway, she did actually fight them off a little bit.
I mean, it's more so in the next movie that they establish Rachel properly, in my opinion. They sort of
Yeah.
Well, that is true. Well, that is true, Chess. But I feel like it's time we give a bit of a mention to Alfred, played in this movie by Michael Caine.
Now, just like the Batman, he is just as great in this movie, and I like Michael Caine in this film. But
I
though
definitely
I
agree with you
must
on
tell
that.
you that him in Jaws: The Revenge was absolutely a disaster. But Christopher Nolan made him a better actor in this film.
That is true.
Well, I don't know if I can do a pretty good Michael Caine impression or not, but I'm trying here.
Don't worry. Don't worry, Governor. I can see you're at least attempting it. And then, of course, we have the guy. And then, of course, we have the brains behind all of Batman's gadgets. Lucious Fox, played perfectly in this movie by Morgan Freeman. And I mean, seriously, hey, Morgan Freeman, you're good at any role. Hell, you played God in Bruce Almighty. Hey, when I die and go to heaven, I'm gonna picture you as Morgan Freeman.
Yep. Oh, and also, as we were just talking about actually a little earlier ago, Liam Neeson's character, the villain of the film. Honestly, do you know what I like about him? In a way, he does have a bit of a point about, because he's mostly talking about crime and everything. Especially one of the few issues originally with Bruce was he wanted to kill Joe Chill, and so he did. And
Yeah.
And originally he probably thought killing criminals was the right thing to do. But then, of course, what I like about Liam Neeson's character is that, yeah, I do see where he's coming from. I will admit, crime unfortunately is still, a thing. It's an everyday thing. Crime happens. And so, at least in his eyes, the League of Shadows, they're not, of course, up to date with the modern, justice system. They go, with the old style one. If you've committed a crime, they'll kill you for it.
Yeah.
And I've heard that for centuries and for years they've been trying to, they've been killing criminals who've wronged, who've, caused trouble, but still, I can see where he's going. And he sees Gotham, right, as, one of the biggest cities ever in the world, as, with non-stop crime. Like, crime, he sees it as a city with crime that's gotten out of control. So, in his eyes, he actually thinks it should be a city, as he puts it, that should tear itself apart.
Agreed.
He wants to tear it apart, pretty much.
Hang on, sorry to say this, but can we cut? Can we end this take?
Of course. We'll be right back.